Great, thank you very much. Well, let's stay with the economy for just a moment. So, Naaman, you were vice chairman of the Saray Bank in Libya. Short-term, kickstarting the economy, what role for the private sector? Longer term, if not oil, what do you see?
I also add my enthusiasm to the future of Libya. Libya, I think the people of Libya and the youth of Libya has paid a very dear price for today, where we find ourselves, and I also salute our martyrs who have sacrificed their lives to buy us freedom, bring us freedom. In order to look at the economic sector of Libya, if we just look at some figures which are very important to give you an idea of what the Libyan economy looks like. Libya is a vast country. In size, it is a very large country. It's the fourth largest country in the Arab world. We've got a population of 6 to 6.5 million, with a growth rate of about 2.5% per annum. A workforce that's about 2.5 million people. We've got a GDP of over 96 billion, so that's per capita is around $11,300 per year. We've got more than 60% of the population is under the age of 30. 40% of the population is under the age of 14. So we've got a very, very young population. The problem is that we've had a centralized economy. Everything was managed and run by the government, whereas the private sector only contributed 15% to GDP. On the other hand, the private sector employed more than 30% of the Libyan workforce. And we still have a 30% unemployment, and that's an official rate. So if you look at these figures we discussed, and we've got, if we look at the oil sector, I tend to disagree with Dr. Jibril's yesterday's view that we have depleted more than 60% of our oil reserves. Libya has proven reserves of 44 billion barrels. That's only oil. If we talk about gas, the number is huge and is still not yet well discovered. According to a report that was done by the Monitor Group 2-3 years ago, only 25% of the Libyan reserves have been discovered. So the oil sector will still play a major role of the Libyan economy for the next few years. That does not mean that we want to be dependent on oil, but the oil sector needs to be developed in order that we can develop other industries alongside it, whether it is tourism or being the financial sector. How can we kickstart the economy? Today, we've got $180 billion sitting abroad. 130 billion is roughly central bank reserves. 50 billion is the LIA's reserve, which Mr. Gheriani knows very well about. These funds, unfortunately, are frozen. However, the transitional government or the transitional council has been working extensively at unblocking or unfreezing these funds. There is a mechanism today for $16 billion which have been unblocked for the importation of food, medicine and baby milk. However, the international community said that they are ready to give back these funds once we have an elected government. So the money is coming back to Libya. Do we need in the next 8 months to rebuild our country in terms of infrastructure, or do we need to build institutions and build systems and procedures in place? So I think we will have the funds to rebuild our country. The money is there. What immediately can be done, obviously because the government had a very centralized economy, they had what they call subsidies. Libyan government subsidizes fuel and basic commodities. Libya spends about 10 to 12 billion Libyan dinars per year in subsidies. These subsidies, unfortunately, do not land in the hands of the ones that really need it. We estimate roughly about 40% of the subsidies get smuggled to neighboring countries. I've witnessed that myself when I was driving out of Tripoli 10 days ago to neighboring country Tunisia. There was a strike at the border. Got there, I was about to miss my flight from Jerba. Why is the strike? Because our Tunisian brothers wanted to cross to the border to fill gas at 15 Libyan cents to the litre, roughly 12 US cents to the litre. The Libyan bordermen were saying, we are desperately in need of this fuel today. When we had abundance of fuel, you could come, it's not a problem. So 40% of this subsidized, and 8 out of the $12 billion a year of subsidies, 8 billion goes into the energy sector, whether it's fuel, gasoline, or cooking gas. This is practically 2 billion Libyan dinars a year that is being burnt. If we look at the Libyan population, 40%, we said, of the Libyan population is under the age of 14. So 40% of this population does not have a car. So they do not benefit from gasoline prices at 15 cents. 30% of the population is unemployed. So even if you give them sugar at 5 cents to the kilo, they still don't have the 5 cents to buy the sugar. What we need to do to kickstart this economy is to substitute, and I would like to highlight substitute. We're not eliminating subsidies. We substitute subsidies with cash payout. Give the people the cash. Let them choose whether they want to buy bread, they want to buy gasoline, do whatever they want with it. If we're talking about $12 billion, Libyan dinars, of subsidies, we're talking about 2,000 Libyan dinars per capita. That's roughly 170 dinars a month. That should be given to each Libyan in his hand, and it's up to him what he does with it. Because today, the only person who's benefiting is the rich guy or the well-off person that has more than one car, that could have one air conditioning in every single room, that is benefiting. But the guy who doesn't have it is not getting to it anywhere. It costs the Libyan government 2 billion Libyan dinars just to distribute the subsidized food.
Naaman, I want to come back to this question of various development strategies that have been proposed for kickstarting, but let me get Tarek Yousef into the conversation. Tarek, you're the CEO of Silatech in Qatar and a member of the WEF's Advisory Council in the Arab world. One thing, having heard from your colleagues, if you could help us by putting it in the Libyan situation in regional context. So how do you see Libya in relationship to to Egypt, to Tunisia, the other transformations that we've been hearing about over the last couple of days?
Thank you, David. I obviously want to add my voice of optimism and support to my colleagues, and I want to salute our people on this day and everyone is sitting on this podium for their contribution to bringing us to this moment. I think in the last 9 to 10 months, the discussions and the deliberations on the Arab Spring and the economic and political transitions that have started in at least Tunis and Egypt at the moment have led us to temper a lot of our optimism and to qualify the expectations that exploded in the aftermath of the revolutions that took place initially in Tunis and Egypt and created, both within Egypt but also abroad, expectations that diverged from realities on the ground, from capacities of governments to deliver on them. I think some of the conditions or some of the issues, the factors that have tempered that optimism are probably more amplified in the case of Libya. And by that I mean, if in Tunis and in Egypt, with relatively strong government institutions, with a vibrant political life, with all the limitations it had before, and with civil society that was rather vibrant and a diversified mixed economy, we are now realizing the magnitude of the challenges, the short term versus the long term, questions of legitimacy, sequencing, the role of political actors. I think in Libya the challenges will be all the more amplified, especially after a 42-year period where not only did you have many things missing, but you had a government that effectively dismantled the instruments of the state, and where even the questions of nation building and nationhood in a country that did not have the fruits to build or have the opportunity to build real institutions at a very early age, these never took place. This all leads me, David, to suggest that in fact one of the most important challenges domestically and externally for us Libyans and for the interim government is to manage the expectations of this transition. Management of expectations is also the management of stability, the management of public involvement. Associated and closely linked with the management of expectations is the management of the transition itself. I think there are some lessons from Egypt and Tunis that we should be paying attention to in Libya. They were noted by Ahmed, Jehani and others, but let me just paraphrase them perhaps in two areas that I think in Egypt and Tunis the lessons are clear. One, the management of the political process itself. And that started today. Questions of the legitimacy of who rules, how they make decisions, on what basis they make decisions, their accountability, their transparency. I think one of the lessons from Egypt, as opposed to Tunis at the moment, is that accelerating the political transition and creating political legitimacy is probably in the interest of managing the short term and linking it up to the long term. The more you delay the constitutional process, the more you delay the elections of parliament, the more you find yourself dealing with fault lines within the street, within the political classes, and you have a government that is unable to do anything. So one important, I think, lesson associated with the management of the political transition. I would say the management of the economic transition, there are also lessons there, and this would be of utmost importance. In the case of Libya, after all, this is one of the, someone said a few days ago, it is maybe the first complete revolution we've had in the Arab world to date. You've dismantled the regime. You've removed those who ruled before from the political scene. The expectations are high. The public has suffered. You're in post-conflict transition. In a post-conflict moment, you need to deliver economically, and you need to deliver now. I think injecting stimulus, liquidity, starting with some of the projects that Minister Jehani mentioned, is of the utmost importance. I would go so far as to saying that if you don't manage the short-term economic recovery quickly and successfully, it will complicate the long term. You may not even get to the long term, especially at a moment when we're talking about a combination of youth, arms, post-conflict, weak political institutions, and initial conditions that make the challenge of the transition all the more difficult. These are some of the lessons, I think, from Tunis and Egypt that are emerging that Libya should be in a position to benefit from right now, today, in fact.
Thank you very much. Well, let's turn to some of those difficult issues that are